Barua toka Jaramogi na Kenyatta, wanauliza kama Kenya kuko sawa. Nikawajibu Kenya tuko na disaster, watoto wetu wanazidi kuzikana. Na Tom Mboya ameshika tama, alituacha kama angali kijana. Je, angekuwa mambo yangekuwa sawa? Ndivyo walivyopanga Maulana. Deni mulizoacha bado tunalipa, na tumekopa zingine China, tukajenga reli pia barabara. Zilizobaki watu wakasanya. So tujiangalie, tuko pabaya leo kuliko jana. Sikio la kufa halisikii dawa. Tuko kwa Twitter tunajibizana. Tujiangalie, tuko pabaya leo kuliko jana. Tusipoziba ufa tutajenga kuta. Tusake zetu tungali vijana. Waumini kwa makina pasi kwa bima, kushoto fungu la 10 sadaka kulia. Ndio maana mbele ya kanisa mheshimiwa anakula sakramenti kabla ya raia. Siku za mwisho zimeshawadia, na revelation inatuambia hii generation inachoma picha. Hii generation yetu, so tujiangalie. Tuko pabaya leo kuliko jana. Sikio la kufa halisikii dawa. Tuko kwa Twitter tunajibizana. Tujiangalie. Tuko pabaya leo kuliko jana. Tusipoziba ufa tutajenga kuta. Tusake zetu tungali vijana. Mishuki alisema tufungeni mikanda. Ona leo twavuna tulichopanda. Kura zetu zilitugawanya, makabila na pesa pia tulimanga. So when you make your bed, usingizi gani tumelala? Tutajua tujui, Vision 2030 tabaki ni story. Tujiangalie, tuko pabaya kuliko jana. Sikio la kufa halisikii dawa. Tuko kwa Twitter tunajibizana. Tujiangalie, tuko pabaya kuliko jana.
What's up, family? It's 12:37, 12:38 East African time on the 15th of June 2024. It's a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and we are back yet in the Black Hot Fire Network, to talk about Africa.
Freedom never comes for free. We both tribe my real cash as no need. Tuna Roma ya mwezi tajesu plus dogi. Wa mzima Twitter keotino fast.
I'm just finishing up official song that and I'm talking about systems, and especially the education system in Africa, and how from it foreign it's progressive, and one of the
Mishuki alisema tufungeni mikanda. Ona leo twavuna tulichopanda. Kura zetu zilitugawanya, makabila na pesa pia tulimanga. So when you make your bed, usingizi gani tumelala? Tutajua tujui, Vision 2030 tabaki ni story. Tujiangalie, tuko pabaya kuliko jana. Sikio la kufa halisikii dawa. Tuko kwa Twitter tunajibizana. Tujiangalie, tuko pabaya kuliko.
Sikio la kufa halisikii dawa.
Dear Lord, today I come before you for two things. Grateful for keeping me alive even though unajua my day na kutupea Kenya amnesia. Asante. Sisi ni vipofu na viziwi na tunajua translator wetu alisha dedi. 2022 already, si mnajua nani ni prezi, si mnajua nyinyi voters ndio washenzi. Kwani hamjui mdomo yangu ilibatizwa na wakongwe? So nashanga mbona akili zenu time ya kura zinajanga shonde. Na hiyo wiki ndio najua jirani yangu wanga mjaka, kama kumbe wanga msapere, hata salamu.
That is King Kaka with Wajinga Nyinyi. I wish I could find. I'm gonna share this video for this song. Wajinga Nyinyi means you the fools, and he's talking not just to Kenyans but to the whole of Africa. That you indeed are the fools, because how do you not see some of the things that are happening, and how do you see them and just remain calm as if nothing is happening? But anyways, let us start the show. I think I'm now ready, and today we're going to be talking about systems, and especially foreign systems that we have in Africa, which is basically every system. So we do need like 5 shows in order to just finish the systems, and in order for us to just do the oppressive and the foreign systems that we have in Africa. You know, I have to talk about the financial systems, I have to talk about the judicial systems, I have to talk about every system that we have, administrative system, I have to talk about the education system, I have to talk about the religious systems, and how all of those systems were specifically made, and I don't like even using the word made, I like using the word tailored, was specifically tailored to keep Africa in the dark. But that is not what we are going to be talking about today. Today we are going to be focusing on one of the systems that is very, very, very specifically tailored, and that is one of the reasons why Africa is so ignorant. So many people in Africa are so in ignorance, because it's by design, because of the system and how it has been put in place to make sure that nothing really works. When I talk about education system, we're going to be looking at, for example, the education system in Kenya and the education system in Nigeria and the education system in Ghana. What are the similarities? And you're going to notice, one, apart from the systems being colonial systems, we've just been handing down colonial systems over the years. For example, the Kenyan system is the same system that was there in the 60s. All they do is change the names and a few adjustments here and there, but it is the same system. It is the same British system that was introduced earlier on, it being the seven, was it a seven? It was up to class 7, then you go to up to form 6. I don't remember if it was the 764 or something before it became the 844, and now there's the new CBC. You go to Uganda, you're going to find the same, where they have to go up to form 6, but it is not even about the duration and the name or the structure. It's more about what is really taught and what do students and learners in Africa spend half of their lives learning. Because, to be honest, in order for you to be a graduate, the life expectancy in Kenya is what is the life expectancy in Kenya? It has to be 62 years or thereabouts. So for a life expectancy of 32 years or 62 years, and for you to be a graduate, you're gonna graduate at around the age of 25, 26. If you're lucky enough, if you do your master's, then that is up to 28, 29. If you have to do a PhD, then that is about 32 years. So when I say most Africans spend half of their lives learning, studying non-entities, and when I say non-entities, I mean it is a system that is so full of rubbish, to say the least. And so you're going to be looking at the history. Where did it really begin? You know, it didn't just begin in East Africa. It has been there, especially after African countries started getting independence, that is in the 50s, 60s. And that was when we saw the Portuguese picking a few people from their colonies and taking them to Lisbon. And when they went there, they got indoctrinated with a lot of rubbish. And so these are the people who came back to Africa. And when they came back to Africa, of course, people in Africa would believe whatever these ones were saying, because these ones are from Lisbon. Have you ever been out of Ghana? You've never been out of Ghana. So when somebody comes to you from Lisbon, with the information that they give you, it's what you're going to believe. And that was when the British also picked up a group of people from Kenya, a group of people from Uganda, took them for further education in their countries. And what was happening was not further education, but was indoctrination. And those people who were taken there and came back, majority of them are the ones who became the first presidents, ministers, vice presidents we had in Africa, the likes of Jomo Kenyatta, the likes of all of them, most of them, the likes of Julius Nyerere, were people who were airlifted for further studies, so they say. And that was especially dominant in the Portuguese protectorate and also the British ones. Basically, for the whole of Africa, that is what they did. And those are the people who came and started implementing now the education system that was also put in place, the education system that was put in place, that was handed down to them for them to come and help in indoctrinating more people in Africa. And it was at that time that you would hear people like Jomo Kenyatta talking about, we have two enemies in Kenya. The first one is illiteracy, the second one is poverty, which was true. He was correct about that we had two enemies back then, 1963. Now we have more. One was illiteracy, the other one was poverty. However, the irony is that none of the problems was dealt with. For the illiteracy one, they did away with the illiteracy, but they brought in ignorance. And now what we produced was educated idiots, for lack of a better term. People with degrees, but who cannot really help you in anything. Education systems that are not based on anything solid. And the rest of the world is teaching the students and pupils about STEM, teaching them about science, teaching them about mathematics, teaching them about technology, teaching them about, right now, every country, the likes of Korea, the likes of China, are so deep in teaching their learners about AI, in teaching their learners about coding, in teaching their learners about computer programming, in teaching their learners about technological integration in everything. So that whatever comes, it doesn't matter whether AI is going to come and take over jobs, because it will. Artificial intelligence is going to take over quite a few jobs and, of course, change how various operations and things are done in Africa. For example, if I want to, right now, I can actually generate a poster for my show using an AI. So that means the next maybe 5-6 years, graphic designers will no longer be as needed as they are. So as the rest of the world is preparing, bracing for the changes that are really going to come with the technological advancement that is now at its peak, especially to do with integration of artificial intelligence in our daily activities, in Africa, we're still having to cram manipulated history. We're still having to cram, I don't know, the Quran. We still have to cram the Bible. We still have to talk about how Lake Victoria is named after the Queen of England because of a certain white man was the first to see it. You taught a lot of non-entities, a lot of bullshit, really, at the expense of you becoming enlightened. You become not illiterate, but educated, yet you cannot materialize anything. You cannot apply your knowledge or education in any aspect, really. And so we're going to be looking at some of those education systems, especially studying it using the Nigerian one and the Kenyan one and the Ghanaian one. And you're going to see how the education systems, especially many years later, and I'm not going to be doing a lot of talking today, we're going to be listening to a professor from Kenya. His name is Dr. Professor PLO Lumumba. He's going to be talking about the same. He is a Pan-African, among the few remaining Pan-Africans who can actually stand in a global stage and without fear talk about Africa as it is. So we're going to be looking at his speech. He had a speech in one of the conventions. I don't remember it was in what parliament, so I'm going to look for that video and share it. And he was speaking about the same, about the education system in Africa and how, for example, I remember when I was in doing my business class in high school, I spent about a whole term studying about the IMF and the World Bank and how they are beneficial to the African people and how their main objective is to alienate poverty. Their main objective is to bridge the gap between third world countries and first world countries. And I believed that, and I know many Africans believe that today because we were taught that in business class. There was a whole unit topic about the same, about those international monetary organizations, the likes of World Economic Forum, the likes of African Development Bank, ADB, the likes of World Bank, and how really they benefit Africa, and how, were it not for them, Africa would not be where it is. It would be doing worse. Only for you to come and later realize that the Bretton Woods institutions were actually made for the opposite. Only for you to come and realize that every country that has been a friend of the institutions has failed. The latest example being Ghana. Ghana was IMF's favorite son. Not long ago, I'm talking about 2019. Ghana was the Kenya in 2019. It was the example, the perfect example. It was a country that the IMF projected would become Africa's economic power hub in 10 years. It was a country that at one point the IMF was saying its GDP and its growth rate was higher than any other country in the world. That was in 2019. Where is Ghana right now? Ghana had to default on loans, not because it has the balls to do so, but because it didn't have any money to pay for anything. And it had to take the same institution that loaned it to loan it another loan to pay itself. So you owe me, then I loan you money to pay me. And now you have to pay interest on the first loan that I gave you and the second one that I've given you to pay me. But now it becomes difficult for the people to grasp, for the people to understand what is really happening in some of these scenarios, because if the Ghanaian education system is similar to the education system in Kenya, then at one point, the people in Ghana were taught about the benefits, about the advantages of having those international monetary institutions in your side. Because I was on X yesterday, and I was shocked to see Kenyans celebrating that. The G7 summit is happening in Italy at the moment. We're having the G7 summit where they're talking about the Ukrainian war, investment in Africa, among other things. So apparently the only African leader who was invited for the G7 summit, the only black person on the G7 table was none other than William Ruto. There wasn't any other. Let me see if I can see a picture of that. There wasn't any other African politician on that table. And so I was shocked when I saw people celebrating that. They thought it was a flex that, our president is the only one who was allowed at the table with, the others big African politicians, the other world politicians, including the Pope. To them, it's a flex. Why? Because you really can't blame them, because, as I told you, we have a lot of educated people, ignorant, educated people, and that is more dangerous than illiterate. That is more dangerous than illiterates, really, because it doesn't even take a lot for you to find the difference. For example, majority of the people who fought for the African independence, including the Mau Mau in Kenya, including the Maji Maji rebellion in Tanzania, including the armed rebellion that happened in Zimbabwe, including the armed rebellion that happened in CAR, majority of those people had never gone to a single school. They didn't know how to read, they didn't know how to write. They were our grandfathers who were, I would say, illiterate, because they really did not have that hand on, they didn't know how to read and write, and that was why they were easily lied to after independence, and most of them were scammed. And the poster boys who had been taken to for indoctrination in those countries are the one who became the first African presidents in most cases. But anyway, those ones were not educated, they didn't know how to read, they didn't know how to write, but they knew that what was happening was not right. They knew these people should not be taking our lands, we should not be slaves to anybody. It doesn't take the knowledge of the books for you to know that you should not be a slave to nobody. But now what we have is educated people who have degrees, who have diplomas, who have masters, who have doctorate degrees and PhDs, but who sit in the same table as the oppressors and laugh, and they do not see a problem with it. So which one is more dangerous? The current literate fools, or our grandfathers who did not have the knowledge of the books but knew that what was happening was not right? So because what we have now is people, I saw people celebrating that Ruto was the only African president leader who was allowed at the G7 summit table. And I quickly remembered, yeah, in the G7 summit 2024 family photo, he is there at the front, and they thought that was a flex, having our president is the only one who can sit among the oppressors. Reminded me of the House Negro narrative, the House Negro and the Phil Negro story. But anyway, if the education system was really working as it should, because it isn't even close to working, then we should be easy to notice, for example, that some of the things that some of the reforms, some of the policies that we push in Africa are not even African policies. Look at the economic reforms that are happening in Nigeria at the moment. Look at the economic reforms that are happening in Egypt at the moment. Look at the economic reforms that are happening in Ghana at the moment. Look at the economic reforms happening in Ethiopia and the economic reforms happening in Kenya. So apparently, those are all different governments, but they're having the same economic reforms being implemented at the moment. And the economic reforms include, they have so much similarities. They cut across the same areas, especially talking about doing away with fuel subsidization, stopping subsidizing on basic commodities, cutting down on government, not cutting down, stopping government recruitment, for example. There won't be the government is not going to hire anybody in Kenya for the next 1 year. There will be no civil service recruitment. Why? Because the government is planning to cut on expenditure. It's the same thing that is happening in Nigeria, the same thing that is happening in Ghana. And you wonder, is it by coincidence that all these leaders are thinking the same? They're coming up with the same policies. Unnecessary policies, by the way, because for a country like Kenya that has unemployment rate as high as the Kenyan one, for a country like Ghana that has a high an unemployment rate as high as it is, talking about the civil service not hiring anybody for the next 1 year is ridiculous, to say the least, because how many people are going to graduate with courses that require the government to hire them? How many teachers are going to graduate in the next 1 year? How many doctors are going to graduate in the next 1 year? How many nurses are going to graduate in the next 1 year? Where will they go? If the government has decided it's not going to hire anymore, apparently to cut down on government expenditure. And you look at those policies, you look at those documents, and I shared a video yesterday on the updates of the Treasury PS being questioned about some of those policies, and he had no answer. And I was telling kids, I don't even blame the Treasury Cabinet Secretary. He's as clueless as I am. It's a document that he received. He probably saw the document 2 days before I did. hasn't even gotten to look at the whole of it. It's not his document, it's not a Kenyan document, it's not a document that we have made ourselves. It's a foreign document that has been brought, tabled, and that we have to follow to the latter. You are told these are the economic reforms. That is John Perkins' Confessions on Economic Hitman in real life now. It's what is happening in Nigeria, where they have all that debt. Nigeria is going through inflation. Nigeria's currency is plummeting down. Nigeria's unemployment rate is at a sky high. Everything is going up in Nigeria apart from salaries. Actually, part of the government cutting down on expenditure program plan is cutting down on wages. Not politicians' wages like we sing in Burkina Faso, where Traore cut down politicians' wages by 30% and increased civil servants' wages by 50%. So in these other countries, it's the opposite. In Ghana, in Egypt, in Ethiopia, it's the opposite. We're seeing everything going up except salaries and wages. And so you have and it's a very stupid approach, because what happens is the government looks like it's cutting down on expenditure, but really the government is not cutting down on anything. It's just transferring the budget to the people. For example, in Kenya and Nigeria, they are doing away with the fuel subsidization. That means the government is not going to help citizens shoulder the cost of fuel, which we majorly import. So that means the cost of fuel is going to go up in Kenya and Nigeria. So the government will look like it has spent less, which it has in fact done, but the burden has been transferred to the people. And so when the economists and the IMF, accountants, and people who look at the books come to Kenya, they're going to analyze the books, and they're going to see that Kenya did cut down on expenditure by 60%. No, the government did cut expenditure by 60%. But all the government did was transfer the 60% to the people. And that is why you're going to look at countries like Ghana, and you're going to see them talking about Ghana grew by 7.8%, that is, according to them. However, if you go to the people, you are not going to see the 7.8%, because what grew was not even the people. It was paper growth, really, towards paper growth, because the burden was shifted to the people, and now the government looks like it is doing better than it was the previous year. And we still have budgetary allocations in our budgets. For example, in the Kenyan 2024-2025 budget, there is a 900 million budget called confidential expenditure. Confidential expenditure on a public budget. That is not don't confuse that as the one that is going to the NIS, that is the National Intelligence Service, and the defense forces and the security agencies. I would understand if the security agencies were given a budget and they do not disclose how they used it. That is a norm in most countries, where the defense, the security agencies are given a budget and they don't really have to go into details, talk about we bought those weapons, we did this, because of. But now this one is 900 million Kenya shillings being allocated for confidential expenditure. That is government money on a public budget. What do you mean confidential expenditure? That means the money cannot be questioned. Nobody can ask, where did the 900 million go? It is money that cannot be questioned, cannot be traced. Nobody has to know where it went, because it's confidential expenditure. Imagine still having that talk in 2024, and a big shout out to Byron Scott and General Mosquito who are with me. And that is what we have produced over the years is graduates who cannot question anything. And it is really a manifestation of King Leopold's two letter to the Belgians in Congo. Was it the Belgians? Yeah, where he was telling them, teach the people to read but not to reason. So we read but we do not reason. I'm gonna read the budget and see a 900 million confidential expenditure, but I'm not going to ask, why is there a confidential expenditure on a public budget? We have 200 million being spent on purchase of new vehicles. We have 600 million being used to renovate the deputy president's house. That is just the Kenyan budget that I'm remembering offhand, 2024-2025 budget, where you are taxing everything, including. But then the education system has worked so well in producing people who can read but cannot reason, cannot question anything. We know you look at a budget and you know this is wrong, but you cannot question it. You like, what am I going to do? While our grandfathers who had never gone to school, who did not even know how to read those budgets, could look and could see the lies behind the so-said missionaries who came with the Bible in one hand and the gun in the other. You know, they in all honesty, they had not gone to school. They were illiterate, most of them, book illiterate. But they could look at that white man with his Bible and his gun and see the lie behind. And they fought him. So is the education system, now that we are learned, we can speak fluent English, we can do mathematics, we have the latest devices, we have the latest gadgets, we can go to social media and see everything. Or is it that we've become more cowardice and more retrogressive, really, because our grandfathers would not take it as we are taking it, even though they were not as educated as we are. They would see the lies behind it. I doubt if this current generation of Africans was the one that was there in the 1960s. I would doubt if they would have fought back. They would have fought the white man. This current generation, the one that is there, they think they know, but they don't. And that was what Chinua Achebe was talking about when he said the physical colonialism, the neo-colonialism is worse than the previous colonialism that we had. Because for that one, people knew they were colonized. They would get whipped. They knew that they were under somebody. The white man would spit on your face, literally. And the Caucasians would beat the hell out of us. So we knew we need to do something. But now with this neo-colonialism, you know, they spit on your face, but not physically, really. Although they do it physically, they mostly do not do it physically. They're going to spit on your face by so many other means. And so we are colonized, but we do not know we are colonized. It's akin to you being sick and not knowing you're sick. And you being sick and knowing you're sick. When you know you are sick, you're going to seek treatment. But now you feel like you're sick, but you don't know if you're sick. That is the current situation that we are in. And the education system has not made anything better because we do not know we are sick, yet we are sick. That is why we cannot really be able to do anything. We we look at the things that are happening. You try to explain to somebody, for example, that you know what, the new economic reforms that we're seeing in Kenya, they are not even do not even point fingers at the treasury minister. He does not even understand what the document is about. He's as clueless as you are, and they do not understand what you're talking about. They think you are a conspiracy theorist when you tell them that man does not understand anything in that document. For example, right now in Kenya, there's a talk about vaccinating all. Actually, it's not a talk. The vaccination process has begun. There is a vaccination process ongoing where 22 million of lives will be vaccinated. That is every stock in this country will get vaccinated. That is not the sad part. The sad part is that people genuinely believe that that is government. They believe it's government goodwill. Oh, the government goodwill. cares about us so much that it is vaccinating uh, our cattle. And you tell them that, you know what, nobody really cares about you and your cows, bro. They want to mess up with your food. Wasn't Bill Gates here the other day, and is he not the one who always speaks about how cows are contributing to climate change? He said cow fats contribute to climate change. He said cows fatting produces more carbon emission than vehicles. That is his reasoning. He was here a year ago, brought with him some genetically modified food that went into the market that we are currently consuming. And now there's a new talk about vaccinating all, not a talk, it has started. They were in Isiolo, they vaccinated 6,000, was it 6,000 or 66,000 herds of cattle there. So any beef you consume, any milk you drink, any dairy product that you take. And the talk was that Kenya has started exporting milk to the UAE, and the UAE is complaining that there are strains of diseases in the milk. That is the talk. That is what Kenyans were told. I'm going to share videos of the same because, and I blame this majorly on the education system that produced people who can read, but people who cannot reason. Is it the beginning of the end? Maybe. Am I exaggerating? I don't know. But what happens when your whole food system is tapped into? Because what do you mean? The milk now, the beef now, I cannot even be able to enjoy my beef anymore. I cannot be able to enjoy, because they have touched on, they first did with agriculture, they did with the seeds, where now farmers are required to buy seeds only from the Kenya Seed Corporation, and it looked like a good idea at first, but it wasn't really, because that is somebody who controls your food system controls you. They might control your financial systems and everything, but as long as you have food, you are good. I've been to Uganda. Is one country that is such. In Uganda they have no money, but they have food, and those people are the happiest people you are going to meet in this world. Broke but full. They have food. They have a lot of food there. Good food, big bananas, good milk, eggs. They actually import millions of eggs to Kenya, millions of liters of milk to Kenya. They do not have money. Uganda is poor. It's a very poor country. They do not really have money, but they have food. But when somebody taps into your food, starts controlling your food, then that person has 100% controlled you. And that is what is happening, not just in Kenya. I know Kenya is just the guinea pig. It's the one that is being used to see what is going to happen. Because it's not even, I learned about this yesterday. And when I thought, wow, this is not a good thing. People should oppose this. But then when I checked, I was shocked to realize that it is not even a new thing. They have been vaccinating cows for the last 1 month. It just came into limelight yesterday when the president talked about it. That every cattle in this country, 22 million of them, is going to get vaccinated. Against what? I don't know. I've not heard of a disease outbreak. I'm sure the cattle are doing well. I was in the village the other day. The cattle are healthy. They do not need vaccination. And that is not, it doesn't take you to even be any educated. It doesn't take you to be a professor for you to see, in a country where nothing else is working, we have power breakouts every day. We have not even enough medicine in hospitals. The doctors are out in the streets protesting. Teachers are protesting. They were fired. They fired all junior secondary school teachers because the teachers complained. The teachers are getting paid how much? 15,000 Kenya shillings, $150 a month for teachers. And the teachers could not take that. $150 before deductions. That is lower than somebody working at Target or KFC. I don't know. I'm sure they don't get paid $150 a month. Sure, they don't. While a politician is paid $4,000, $6,000, a teacher is paid $150. It's not even 150, it's about $120 a month. So they were in the streets protesting and they were fired, all of them. They were all fired. So in a country that nothing else is, I mean, we've done away with all the problems. We solved the teachers. We have dealt with the medical interns who are in the streets protesting. We are done with unemployment. We are done with all the other problems. And now the problem that we have is vaccinating cattle against an non-existent disease for free. For a government that is taxing everything, this one is for free. For a government that introduced a 16% tax on sanitary pads, in a country that people do not afford sanitary towels, women do not afford sanitary towels, the government introduced a 16% tax on the same. That was not enough because the sanitary towels are packed in a plastic, in a nylon container that is made up of plastic, in a nylon packaging, there is an eco tax on the same. So in the next year, people will not be able to afford even sanitary pads because even those ones are getting taxed. 16% on sanitary towels in a country that even at the current zero, sanitary towels in Kenya are not taxed. They are at 0% VAT taxed. Currently, as it is at 0%, people cannot afford it. There are women who cannot afford it, especially in the rural areas, in those villages where it's dry, the Turkana areas and the ASAL, we call them the ASAL, the arid and semi-arid regions. They cannot afford, but now there's a 16% tax on the same. In a country that is even taxing cancer treatment. So the government reasoned and saw that anybody who's affording chemotherapy or cancer treatment is rich. So there's a 16% tax on cancer treatment. As you'll be paying for your cancer drugs, you're going to add a 16% taxation, the same. For a country that is taxing all that, they are giving vaccinations for free. It's the same government that is also taxing farmers for every herd of cattle you have. You know, if you have a cattle, you are getting taxed on, not cattle, if you have any livestock, if you rear livestock, you're getting taxed per head of livestock that you have, you'll get taxed for that. If you own a vehicle in Kenya, you're going to pay $1,000 a year. $1,000 a year. That is in property tax. It is called the motor vehicle tax. Either $1,000 a year or 2.5% of the value of your car, whichever is more. But in the midst of all that taxation, they apparently do not require any money from you. We're giving you free vaccines for your cattle. Your very healthy cattle needs vaccination. For your very healthy cattle needs vaccination. And you tell people, this has come after Bill Gates was in the country the other day. And Bill Gates is the one, everybody knows. You've all seen videos of Bill Gates talking about how cow fats produce carbon, more carbon than vehicles. He jets into the country with a jet, but complains that cows fat. And since we can't stop cows from fatting, we should do away with them. And a few months after he has left the country, there's a new proposal of why don't we vaccinate all cattle? Do you need to be a professor for you to see what's happening? In case you think I'm making that up, here is a video of Bill Gates talking about cow fats and how they produce carbon.
Built every month for the next 40 years. What does that mean? Is that good or bad?
Well, I use that as an opportunity to explain that when people think of climate change, they think mostly about electricity. And that's only a quarter of the emissions come from coal, natural gas plants that are generating your electricity. We make materials like steel and cement. Those two alone are about 1/8 of the emissions. And so the fact that we're going to build these cities, that the world is urbanizing, means that unless you have a totally zero emission way come near to solving the overall climate problem. And so moving away, the term clean energy has handicapped the field because that makes people think, oh, maybe it's just electricity and passenger cars, and they don't see agriculture, industry, buses, trains as part of the problem.
One crucial part is agriculture, and one thing you said you were particularly surprised by was how great a problem bovine flatulence is. Do you want to explain what that is and why it's a problem?
Yes. So the animals that can eat grass have very unusual stomachs that have these bacteria that are methanogenic in there. And so they leak natural gas, both out the front and the back. And so people have said, well, let's change the hay or throw some things in there. And it's been, nobody knows how to get rid of
no one knows how to get cows to stop farting.
Exactly, or burping. And so there is artificial meat, but that's at a very early stage. But that's another big source of greenhouse gas emission. So, I'm just trying to make sure that the people who acknowledge the problem, which I think is fantastic, that they understand the breadth of innovation required before you can get anywhere near what we have to do, which is zero. If it was a 50% reduction, then you could ignore, okay, leave the cows alone. But because we're trying to avoid the temperature continuing to go up, you do need to go to zero. Otherwise, you're continuing to have temperature increase.
You threw a party in Beijing, a toilet fair. Why are you obsessed with toilets?
Well, I guess I'm obsessed. The challenge is that the biggest cities in the world will be places like Lagos, 20, 30 million people. And the way we think of sanitation in the rich world is we build sewer systems, we put a lot of clean water in, and we build...
I wanted you to see the cow part, the cow fat part, where he's talking about how cow fats produce carbon emission. So this man was in your country a few months ago, even a year has not passed, and the next thing is vaccination on all cows, and you are giving out your cattle willingly to the government. You are vaccinated. Well, your cattle is absolutely healthy, 100% healthy, no disease in it. And Jiba Jaba is saying, is Ruto taxing tampons? Yeah, Ruto has introduced a 16% tax on sanitary towels. And he says, what's the cattle disease that gives them bumps all over their flesh? So it on Uganda News. Must be the only disease that actually affects cattle in the country, and there hasn't been an outbreak in a while, is foot and mouth. There's a disease called foot and mouth. It's a disease that they have been containing over the years. It's an absolutely normal disease in cattle, and they always contain it. Whenever there is an outbreak somewhere, they are able to treat it. So I don't understand the new obsession with taxing. I do not get the new obsession with taxing, with vaccinating. Just a minute. Yeah, I could not get a new obsession with vaccinating cattle. They do not need vaccination. We have other problems that we should be dealing with at the moment, including unemployment, which is at a very high rate, including the teachers who are fired for asking a salary raise. I mean, who gets paid $120 a month for an 8 to 5 job? You wake up at 8, you teach students up to 5 p.m. 30 days a month, you get paid $120 by the government. You strike, you fired. The same government that has money to vaccinate cattle, apparently. Is that not trying to mess up with our food system? I don't know if that is. It doesn't get clearer than this, especially after they did with the seeds now. Where so it comes in three ways. This food control system. I've seen it in Kenya, so I can talk about Kenya. I don't know about what is happening in other countries. One is now for you to artificially inseminate your cattle, you'll need to do it through government given procedures. I mean, there are people who the government has set aside for AI, artificial insemination, which is very popular in the country, where people now artificially inseminate their cattle for, of course, better breed quality and everything, for more milk, better beef. So now the veterinaries who are doing it on private basis will not be allowed to do it unless you are using the artificial seed that is being given by the government. So where is the artificial seed coming from? I don't know. Why they want to control that, we all know. The second one is now the new vaccination. Vaccination on all livestock, 22 million herds of them. The third one was the one that they did with the Kenya Seed Corporation, where one, they are privatizing the Kenya Seed Corporation. The Kenya Seed Corporation is the corporation that is responsible for producing seeds for maize, for corn, for potatoes, for basically every Kenyan crop. They are the ones who distribute the seeds to the farmers. It's getting privatized. It's going to be sold. The government is selling the Kenya Seed Corporation, a corporation that has been making profits. There's absolutely zero reason to sell it, but it's getting sold, it's getting privatized. He's going to buy it, some Kenyan, of course, but as a proxy, they're going to say we sold it to a Kenyan from Nairobi. The Kenyan who has absolutely no idea, they just used his name and was given a few millions to, you know. So when they take over the seed corporation and your livestock, then your food system is all messed up. The next thing that you know is you eating poisoned food and everything. And Jeba Jaba is still shocked about taxing of tampons. Told you they're even taxing treatment on cancer. If you are diagnosed with cancer, as you're getting treated, there's a 16% tax on the same. Because if you can't, they think you can't get cancer if you're not rich. So you have to pay 16% tax for being sick. Because why do you have cancer? 16% on you. You under the Ruto tax you, you have two nuts. Because it's one nut. They're even taxing digital earnings. That is, for example, if this was if Black Hot Fire was a Kenyan corporation, any money that Black Hot Fire gets from YouTube is getting taxed before it enters Black Hot Fire's account. That goes for creators on TikTok, creators on YouTube, creators on any social media platform, including musicians. They are going to get taxed on the same on digital earnings. For what I told you, you look at the budget and you look at the lie and the budget. And so the lie was that we are increasing taxes so that we can reduce on borrowing. And I was like, wow, that's a good idea. How about we cut on borrowing and tax ourselves and live on by our means, because that is what that is the new term that they have learned. It's the same term Tinubu was using, telling Nigerians we have to live within our means, we can't keep borrowing. And I say, well, shout out to you, to Tinubu, if he can reason like that. I mean, we don't have to borrow, we can tax ourselves, and our earnings, our taxes can cater for the expenditures. But then you look at for Kenya, for example, Ruto borrows 62 million every hour. If you take his total borrowing, his total debt, and you divide it by the hours that he's been in office, for every 1 hour, he borrows 62 million. So what's the point? And Jibba says next it's going to be fish fats and carbon emission. He's saying Kenya is like California in the US. All oppressive laws start there and then spread across the country. I guess that was the reason our president was the only one who was present at the G7 summit in Italy, sitting on the table with them oppressors, talking about investment in Africa and ending the war in Ukraine, the war. And so majorly, I blame the system, and especially the education system, for producing literate people who cannot reason. Because how do we see some of these things and not do anything about it? Do we see some of these things and just be okay? Okay, to be fair, there has been a revolution like happening in Kenya, but online. There has been a digital revolution happening online in Kenya. It was only this week that an online campaign was launched called Find Your MP. So the MPs are the ones who are going to vote for or against this bill, the new bill that is going to tax everything, including tampons. So Kenyans started an online campaign where they shared the numbers of every Kenyan MP, every politician, personal contacts from the president downwards. Every contact, including the president's number, was shared. And they have been calling and texting them and spamming them with messages the whole of this week, telling them to not pass that bill. One MP was complaining that he received about 7,000 messages in a single night. And they could not sleep because of the number of phone calls that were coming in, their private number. And now they want to talk to their families, but they can't even find your family's message because there are 7,000 others. And on Tuesday, they're going to be voting for the bill, and there's going to be a protest outside Parliament. There was even one Kenyan who wanted to beat them up. Let me share that video. I shared it earlier this week, but just in case anybody was not with me. As the budget was getting read, so there was even one Kenyan who decided that I'm not even going to protest on Twitter. I'm going to beat the hell out of these people myself, alone. He was taken to court yesterday and he was not even fearing anything. He told the judge, if you want to jail me, you can jail me. But so let me share a video of him in court so that you can actually see, giving credits to them. There's been something is brewing. People are getting tired. So this was the man who wanted to beat up the Treasury CS and the MPs as they were taking a photo outside Parliament after reading the new budget. He was taken to court yesterday, and even his lawyer was trying to stop him from speaking because he was speaking too much. He was even telling the judge. The other day, earlier this week, there was a judge who was shot in a court. The judge passed a judgment, and the husband of the accused shot the judge in a court. So this man was telling the judge, there was even a judge who was shot. You do not scare me. And even the lawyers were trying, his lawyer was trying to tell him to shut up, but he could not. He said, if you want to jail me, go ahead and jail me. But it has reached a point where we have to speak.
Nobody cares. So I don't know what's the role of the government. I don't know. I want to know today what's the role of the government. I think we have failed us. The government has failed. Everybody has failed. We have also failed ourselves. I don't know. My concerns do not allow me to decide. And at any time, at any moment, I don't know whether this is going to come up anywhere.
That was his lawyer trying to tell him to now shut up because he was 100% now going to get jailed because he was even attacking the judge, telling the judge, "You can jail me if you want. Your colleague was shot the other day, so your day is going to come too. So you can jail me if you want." So this is his lawyer trying to contain him, but he could not be contained. And the anger is brewing really because look at Nigerians. They were in the streets last week. Nigerians were in the streets last week asking for higher wages. So let me share the video as I
must have this debate. We must have this conversation. Fear in this country, a lot of fear in the courts. Just yesterday, we saw a magistrate who was shot by a police officer. I want to speak, dear friends. I want to speak because you tried to tell me to keep silent. My heart is burning. You know, it's burning because of this country. Because for 60 years, we've been like we are not, we are human beings. We are considered like children of a lesser God. Now, this cannot continue. It cannot continue in any way. We are ruled by a minority that does not care for the interests of the majority. We are victims of lies and failed promises, deferred hopes and blasted for 60 years. I don't know what will happen. I don't know whether you're going to sentence me. I'm ready to be sentenced for 100 years. But I'm going to keep speaking the truth until the day I leave this world. You can't continue living like this. My dear friends, we must resist. Resistance is the only way for this country, for Africa. People are dying everywhere. Even in Congo, people are suffering.
Yeah, so that was the man who was arrested, and you can see how fearless he is even in court. And remember, the revolution in there was a revolution in Africa that was started by a man burning himself alive. He just got fed up with what was happening, and he burned himself alive, and that sparked a revolution. Was it in Tunisia? It was in Tunisia where a man stood a vendor who he set himself in fire in December 2010, and that started the Tunisian revolution. So it starts like that, by the way. It starts with one man, starts with one voice. If you do not listen to the voice, the voice grows, and before you know it, you can't contain whatever has been born. And so we have to look at a video of Professor PLO Lumumba talking about the education system in Kenya and why Africa was designed to fail from the word go. From when the independence was given in the 60s, it was already designed to fail. When they, for example, the Portuguese started handpicking people in their protectorates and taking them to Lisbon, and the British started handpicking people and taking them to the UK for studies, to the US, not for studies really, but for indoctrination. And those people, when they came back, we believed them so much, because now we call them professor, now we call them mwalimu. Mwalimu means teacher, the likes of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. You know, they had degrees from foreign lands, and we believed that they were the people who were going to lead us out of poverty. The likes of Jomo Kenyatta, the likes of Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. The likes of the man who took over after Patrice Lumumba was killed in the DRC. So it goes back there to after independence, after Africa was granted independence, that is in the 60s and the 50s, in the 61s. But really they were taken in the 50s. That is when you saw somebody like Jomo Kenyatta left Kenya in the 50s, spent I don't know how many years abroad studying there. And when he came back, it is those people that they handpicked. The Portuguese took them to Lisbon. It was those people that they handpicked and took for further studies in their own countries that they implanted as leaders. They were the people who implemented the first punitive policies in the new independent Africa, the newly independent Africa, including the education systems, are the one that continued with the education started and continued with the colonialist education systems that are based on lies, on non-entities, on things that do not benefit the African people at any way, in any way, at any point. Education systems based on hot air and nothing more. As I said, as the rest of the world is studying, learning about AI, learning about technology, learning about how they can industrialize their countries, Africans are cramming the Quran. They're studying about fake history, manipulated history. And so those people were the first traitors. And it was them that Chinua Achebe was writing and saying the new colonialist is worse than the old, because the new one, he speaks our language, he eats our food, he has our name, and he calls himself our brother. Those are the words of Chinua Achebe when he was writing in 1970. He was looking at the situation in Nigeria and he realized the new colonial master is worse than the old one, because this one speaks our language. The old one we knew he wasn't ours, but this one we believe because he calls himself our brother. And those ones were the first sellouts. So he was talking about the first president of Nigeria who took power in 1960. Was it when did Nigeria gain independence? Was it in 1960? 1963. He was in 1963. Benjamin Azikiwe. And so those black sellouts became the first traitors that we had in Africa. And they were the ones who were used to bring division to the African people. And that is why, for example, in the 1961 Ethiopian Addis Ababa conference, when African leaders met in Addis Ababa, another group met in Monrovia. One African leaders decided to meet and talk about African unification of Africa, the likes of David Duck of Central African Republic and the rest, and Thomas and Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba and many other leaders. They met to talk about the unification of Africa. But as they were meeting, another group split. And went to Monrovia to discuss the same. And so division really started at that moment when there was a split in ideological blocks, where one group was meeting in Casablanca, another one was meeting in a different place. The Casablanca group was the one that was really, really advocating for unification of Africa. It had Ghana in there with Kwame Nkrumah, had Guinea, had Mali, had Libya, Egypt, Morocco, and Algeria. Ignore the last three. However, there was another group that had the likes of Nigeria with their first president, Benjamin Azikiwe, that had Ethiopia with the likes of Haile Selassie, that had Tanzania with Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, that was saying, okay, we need to unite, but not now. We are not in a hurry, are we? And if you look at the people that I've mentioned, most of them are sellouts. They're the ones who are taken to those countries for education, and they're the ones who are given. There was a difference between people who are given power in Africa and those who took power. There were countries that people took power, and one of the countries that power was not really given, they fought for it, was Kenya. The Mau Mau did fight for the Kenyan independence with blood, and many of them were killed, but they fought to the last moment. How Kenyatta became the first president, of course, he was just from being educated outside Kenya. The people believed him because as Chinua Achebe is saying the new master spoke our language and he dressed like us. And so the Mau Mau, in that Kenyatta was a Kikuyu, Kenyatta was a Kenyan, and they were Kenyans too, they believed that he was in their interest, he was for interest, and that is how he became the first president. There were countries that actually fought for they were not granted, they fought for it. Ghana was the other country, it wasn't granted, they fought for it. Countries like Central African Republic, they were not granted. David Dako fought for it. DRC, they were not granted. Patrice Lumumba fought for it. And so there was a difference in the two. And of course, for this other group that had just come from being indoctrinated, they were sellouts, they were not going to accept a unification of Africa. And those are the first people that we always have to blame for how Africa has failed. How many years later? Close to 100 now. That is from the 50s to now, 60, 70 years. Because at that time, Africa was very young. It had a chance to actually be materialized to be what it was. Talking about the 1960s, in the early 60s, when the Monrovian group met in Monrovia and called for unification of Africa. They met in Liberia. But then another group was, as I said, another group met somewhere else to fight what this group was talking about. As this group was talking about unifying, another group met somewhere else to talk about. They called it a more moderate method of unification, where it wasn't an emergency. We could unify, but not in a hurry. It's called the Casablanca group. And the Casablanca group and the Monrovia group is what led to the Addis Ababa Conference of 1963. Of course, by then, now, several leaders had already been eliminated, including Patrice Lumumba had already been murdered. David Dako was already facing it. And at the end of it, the Casablanca group won, because in the 1963 meeting in Addis Ababa, they came up with the OAU instead of them coming up with a unified Africa. So it goes back to those times when the colonial masters realized that they could not stay in Africa longer. They decided, in as much as we are going to leave, how about we leave some people there? Who they are going to believe are their people, but they really are our people. But for us to be able to do that, why don't we first take them, indoctrinate them, make them our people in your clothes? And it happened. They took our people, a lot of them, they airlifted Kenyans, they airlifted so many people. Let me see how many people they airlifted. I know they airlifted people from Kenya to the US. And those people became the first ministers, became the first chief justices, they became the first MPs. They became the first sellouts. Let me see how many they are lifted from Kenya, for context's sake. In 1959, that was when they airlifted the Kennedy. It was called the Kennedy Airlift. Happened in 1959. If you look at the timing, you're going to notice it was when the Mau Mau rebellion had really started hitting in a proper way. That was when it was they realized they couldn't stay longer in Kenya. because it was getting too hot. And out of nowhere, there was that Kennedy airlift. That the first person to be airlifted was actually Tom Mboya, who they later murdered because he could not go. He was shot dead. Tom Mboya, he was a good man, a Pan-African. He was the first Kenyan to be airlifted to the US in the Kennedy airlift. And later on, they had many other Kenyans getting airlifted to the United States, to Canada. They were taken to US universities and other places. And when they came back to Africa, at that time, Africa had just started gaining independence. Of course, we believed them because they were our people. We did not see. We had just finished. We were just from fighting with the Caucasian, with the white man. The last thing that we wanted was to fight with our own. So, for example, the Mau Mau, they had fought for the lands, but they were not as literate. They were not as educated. They did not understand the economics and the way the world operated. All they wanted was their land back and their freedom back, and the white man gone. So when the white man went and they got their freedom back, they really didn't care about the power or who was going to be the president. They were happy with that. And so when somebody came and told them, I'm one of you, I'm educated, let me help you run the country. Not like they had a choice because he was implanted anyway. If you look at most of the people who are made presidents, they had been sellouts before. For example, I'm aware that the first president of Nigeria was the governor before he became the president. He was the first black governor. He was the first black governor of Nigeria. That was in 1960. And when Nigeria gained independence in 1963, he was made president. So who had made him governor in the first place? When you get the answer on who had made him the first black governor, then you're going to know who made him the first president of Nigeria. And I've not even looked into Nigeria, I'm not sure. But I know Benjamin Azikiwe he must have been educated at some point from, he must have had his education somewhere. Their master plan worked really well. You have to give it to them. Their master plan of having people believe they left and actually leaving, but in the process of leaving, they leave people behind who are our people by virtue of birth, by virtue of skin color, by virtue of blood, but sellouts and indoctrinated to serve the goals and objectives of the people who took them for education. And in Kenya, they lifted about 50-something people in the Kennedy airlift. If I look at all of them, most of them, they got into politics, most of them, and they became the first ministers. That is the likes of George Saitoti. He was airlifted. He became a vice president at one time. The likes of Zachary Onyonka, he became a cabinet secretary. The likes of any Kenyan watching can remember those names. They were the names that made the likes of even Obama's father was Barack Obama Senior was airlifted at that point. So let me a video of Professor P.L.O. Lumumba talking about the same.
That we still refer to as francophone, lusophone, Anglophone, and sometimes even Arabophone. It is not lost on me that even I am speaking in a language that is alien.
That is a different video that we're going to look at later. I wanted to share the video of him talking about the education system in Kenya, and there's a part in Africa, and there's a part that he talks about the airlifts and how the airlifts were part of the plan to how the airlifts contributed to the education system that we have right now as it is. Not just the education system, but the systems that we have, most of the systems that we have at the moment, and how they look, how they were structured, how they were tailored, and everything to do with it.
As one of the key understood broadly could be achieved, that ignorance was not bliss. You wanted to create an army of young men and women whose worldview was informed in a particular direction, the direction of liberating Africans, whether they were in the mother continent, in the continent of Africa, or they were in the diaspora in the Caribbean, or in Latin America, or Europe, or Australia. And you will see the series of meetings that are then held during that period. And specifically, they are iconic interactions, because when the colonizer came into the continent of Africa, education was informed by the colonizer. So that if you went to the former Portuguese colonies, there was a very deliberate effort on the part of the Portuguese to recruit a cadre of individuals who would then be taken to Lisbon to be trained and to go back, whether it was Guinea-Bissau or to Angola or Cabo Verde or to Mozambique or to Brazil, in order to serve the colonial infrastructure. And there were very few recruited in that regard. And when one is talking about education in many countries, one can actually identify them, because they then became political leaders in their various countries and were involved in establishing educational institutions. You can talk about Agostinho Neto in Angola, and you will read his poems to understand how great a mind he was. You'll talk about Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde. You'll talk about Eduardo Mondlane in Mozambique. And you come to the former French colonies, the same. And there are people from La Côte d'Ivoire here. You'll know that institutions such as the Sorbonne had specific faculties that were created for the purpose of recruiting young Africans, people like Leopold Sédar Senghor in Senegal, Félix Houphouët-Boigny. And these were individuals who were specifically identified and picked to go for what was fundamentally indoctrination. And of course, the British also did the same thing. And that is how you then understand how they were picked, whether you are talking about in countries such as Zambia, they would pick people like Kenneth David Kaunda. In Malawi, Kamuzu Hastings Banda. In Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. In Tanzania, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, and one would go on and on. And even if you went to the apartheid regimes in South Africa, you'll find that individuals such as Nelson Mandela were directed towards Fort Hare. And Fort Hare was deliberately designed to train young people in order to support what was fundamentally a legal regime and a political regime that was meant to perpetuate itself. If you go to Namibia, and I'm mentioning these individuals because later they become the leaders who are involved in dealing with education in Africa. You go to Namibia, Sam Nujoma did not go to school very much, but he had his stint Andimba Toivo ya Toivo, and one can count all of them. So that the Africa that you are talking about and the education that you are talking about is an education system that was designed to undergird the colonial system. Recently, I went to Zanzibar, and a young man was taking me through the stone town of Zanzibar, and he had the most amazing interpretation. He told me, this is one of the schools that they built in order to teach Africans to think like them. Then this is one of the churches that they created so that they could teach the Africans to worship like them and to paralyze their spirituality. And this is one of the hospitals where they treated them when they were sick so that they could serve them. I thought that was ingenious. It was a correct interpretation, so that whenever the African was educated, it was not by design that you should help your fellow Africans. That was coincidental. You are simply an agent and a vessel for purposes of ensuring that you serve the colonial masters. The French and the Portuguese were more blatant. And the good professor from La Côte d'Ivoire will tell you that when they took people to the parades, one of the things they would do for the Africans to say, our ancestors, the gods. An African saying that their ancestors were the gods. And it is in that context that therefore you must understand when we are talking about the establishment of education facilities across the continent of Africa, universities were informed by that. Whether it was the University of East Africa with campuses in Kampala, Makerere for medicine, the Royal Technical College in Nairobi for engineering, the University of Dar es Salaam for law. And if you came here in Ghana when they established their Chimota College, and I want you to look at the founding instruments of a Chimota and why they established a Chimota. And they were doing that in King's College Budo in Uganda and later in Kisubi. The whole idea was to create an African man and woman who was fundamentally an automaton, designed to serve the master, designed to serve the puppeteer. He or she was meant to be a puppet.
And many years later, you look at what Professor PLO Lumumba is talking about, and you see how well that plan worked. That plan that is also the one that King Leopold was talking about. Teach the Africans to think but not to reason. You look at many years later, you look at how well that worked, and you just have to give it to them. You just wow at how genius and how well it worked, because years later, apart from us still using their system, their education system, their judicial system, their administrative systems, their religious systems, we still produce hundreds and hundreds of graduates every year who are but slaves of the system, who do not have an idea what they are supposed to do. And that explains the high unemployment rate in Africa, of course, apart from the financial system being part of the reason we failed. The education system also is a big issue, because what we see is a mismatch between what is actually needed and what is produced. We need engineers who can actually go down and build our roads, who can solve our power problems. But we end up producing people who have been in school for years but cannot be able to provide the solutions that we need. And the ones who we are actually able to produce, who can able to solve the problems that we have, we cannot accommodate them, because the financial systems that are a result of the education system, that are as a result of the colonial system that we had, do not allow. And that is why we see nurses in Uganda getting paid $150 a month after going to medical school for 7 years, you get paid $150 a month. $150 a month. So even the ones that we produce, even the ones that the education system is as messed up as it is able to produce good professionals in various fields. For example, you heard that some of the best doctors in the world are from Nigeria. Even with its messed up education system, even with years of being taught lies, of being forced to study things that are non-existent and entities, of being forced to learn, digest, and cram lies, they are still able to produce top professionals in various fields. But even those ones that it produces, they are raided from their countries because you cannot be able to, the pay is so poor that we do not even appreciate our very own. That is why we're looking at the medical migration that is happening in Cameroon, where every medical graduate is headed to Canada. They graduate and head to Canada immediately because they are paid $150 too. That is approximately $1,600 a year. Would you survive on $1,600 a year? As a medical doctor who works on a 10-hour shift sometimes, dealing with all kind of diseases with not enough equipment, you get paid $1,650 a year. So even the ones that the education system is able to produce, we do not reward, we do not appreciate them. We are able to produce good engineers at times, but we cannot give them contracts. We give it to the Chinese. We are able to produce good professionals, but we overlook those ones and go for the foreign ones. So years later, you can look at what Professor PLO Lumumba is talking about in terms of the education system being meant to make us slaves of the already existing system, really, and you are going to see that it has worked so well. That is why we have educated people with degrees who are going to look at, for example, the economic reforms that are happening, who are going to look at the corruption that is happening and not do anything about it because we were taught to think, not to reason.
You know, this debate begins to crystallize a lot more visibly in the United States when you are talking about Pan-Africanism. Because the United States is grappling the black man has been released from slavery. They have been told that they would get 40 acres and 1 mule, which they never receive. They have recruited the Uncle Toms, and they are persuading the black people at that time that what you need are a set of skills. Be a good plumber, be a good electrician. And in the United States, you begin to see a battle and two streams. Booker Taliaferro Washington, whom you will remember, and his college in Tuskegee in Alabama, who says the Negro must go to this education institution in order to be trained to have a set of skills, to conform. But there is another stream of W.E.B. Du Bois who says education must be revolutionary. It must change your mind. It must change your thinking. We must think differently. If they have Harvard, we must have Howard. We must think differently. And at that time, a young South African is also visiting and learning in the United States of America. People never talk about him as much as they should. Pixley Kaisaka Seme. Many people don't know, but there is a book written about him as the founder of the African National Congress. Pixley Kaseme is then a student at the University of Columbia.
I
And
did a show about that gentleman, Pixley Kaisa Seme. You can check it out if it's still on this channel. He was among the first Pan-Africans, and the reason you don't hear about him is because he did so much. And if you did so much, then we're not gonna hear about you probably. So most Pan-Africans that you hear about are not really Pan-Africans. They're just the ones that you're supposed to hear about. They're the ones that, if you are really a Pan-African who was fighting for the revolutionization of Africa, you're not going to get talked much about because you're not going to get into the education system, for example. You're not going to get taught in school. That is why I'm sure most South Africans do not know about Pixley Kaisa Kaseme, who was one of the founders of the ANC, the original ANC that was against the racial discrimination and the white settlers in South Africa before we got the proxy, the puppet ANC we have right now. So he is one of the most celebrated African heroes, Pixley Kaisa Kaseme. And let's first get done with Professor PLO Lumumba's speech before.
he delivers one of the most iconic speeches ever delivered by an African in the month of April 1906, the regeneration of Africa. And I commend it to you. He says at that time, and I paraphrase rather than quote Pixley Kaisa Kasem, that Africa must rise again. It must rise from the morass of confusion in which she finds herself. And it is not lost on me that Pixley delivers that lecture in the year 1906. And in 1912, the African National Congress is then founded in South Africa, with Pixley Kaisa Kaseme and Sir Albert Lutuli as some of the leading lights, and of course, Governor Mbeki and others. They are beginning to recognize that education is important. At that time, you also see other Africans going to the United States. Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria, Zik of Africa, to Lincoln College in the United States of America. Kwame Nkrumah is also going to school at that time. Mwalimu Nyerere is in Edinburgh. Kamuzu Banda is also in Edinburgh. People are going. Africa is beginning to see education as something that is important. James Kwejir Agri of Africa, who later became the first Black deputy principal of Achimota College and a teacher of the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah. They are taking all these individuals to Europe and America in the belief that these individuals will do their bidding. But they do not know that they are planting a seed which is going to germinate in a totally different way and to give birth to an educational system which is going to revolutionize the continent of Africa. And you can see quite a number of Africans, even when you go to the former French colonies, you see that wave of Leopold Senghor, as I talked about, Felix Houphouët-Boigny, you see Ahmed Ben Bella, Bibo Giba. All these are individuals, Chekante Diop. All these individuals are going to that part of the world, but the colonizers do not for one moment believe that they are going to come back and be the agents of change and be the agents of revolution of education in the continent of Africa. And this important because the spirit of Pan-Africanism is then being planted at that time. A series of meetings, as I've already indicated, are held in the Caribbean and ultimately culminating in the much more famous meeting in 1945 in Manchester in the United Kingdom, where some of the names that you can recognize are present in Manchester, where the spirit of Pan-Africanism, which is revivalism of individuals who did not go to school. I want us to see education from a totally different perspective. You can see a little later people like Marcus Garvey. No formal education, but they are influenced by this spirit of Pan-Africanism. When he sings, Garvey was a buffalo soldier in the heart of America. When you hear people like Fela Nicola Pokuti, much later in Nigeria, Miriam Makeba from Southern Africa, you can see the arts are being influenced by these. And ultimately, when we talk about Pan-Africanism, 1945, you begin to see a people who know that in order for Africa to realize her potential, her people must begin to work together. And it's instructive. You see people like Walter Nick, and you can see the writing at that time. After 1945, we then begin the agitation, both from the political front and across the continent. Kwame Nkrumah, Josagiefu, is, in my view, the high priest of it all. He sees it differently. Julius Nyerere sees it differently. Magai of Sierra Leone, Tubman, Ahmed Ben Bella, and one can go on and on. They are saying there is something that unites us as Africans, and that thing is what must inform everything we do, leading to the very famous statement by the Osage for himself: you are not an African because you are born in Africa, but you are an African because Africa is born in you. So that you can see the clarity and the purity of thought process at that time. But the neo-colonial Europe is not resting. In former French colonies, what have they done? Félix Houphouët-Boigny is the deputy in the French parliament. Leopold Sédar Senghor is a deputy in the French parliament. And what they do, and excuse me, for the French, they also gave you a wife to ensure that you are under very close marking at all quarters. So you can see that your education beyond the Sorbonne, you are also educated at home. So, and all these things with the help of Einstein, they are very deliberate. They are very deliberate. And doing that because they want to ensure that even after you have left their country, they are still in control of their processes through you.
And that was the first mistake that the newly independent Africa did, was believe that the white man had actually left. He had left, but he had left behind proxies who continued running his processes, who continued pushing his systems, who continued running his policies. He had left behind proxies, he had left behind sellouts that he had prepared for years before he left. For example, I showed you in Kenya. Kenya got independence in 1963, but they had already airlifted people out of Kenya in 1959. So 5 years earlier, they had prepared for their departure. The first president of Kenya was not even in Kenya at that time. He only came back in Kenya when Kenya got independence, and they placed him there. The same in Nigeria, the Azikiwe was not even there, he was placed. And that was the first mistake that we did, was believing that he had, the white man had actually left. He left, but he left behind people who continued running his processes. And you hear Professor PLO talking about they even gave them wives so that they could monitor them even as they slept. And I guess that explains why most of those leaders, it explains the wives they had. They were even allocated wives so that they could even be monitored in their sleep. And this plan, at that time, we did not see it. Some did. The likes of Kwame Nkrumah did see it. The likes of Sankara did see it, the likes of Patrice Lumumba did see it, the likes of Ahmed Ben Bella did see it, but most Africans at that time did not see it. We were on the moon because we thought that we had gotten our independence. Finally, the white man had left. Finally, we had our lands back, which we never really had back. So we were easy to fool because we trusted our people. We trusted the new master. We trusted our brothers who we had not seen for a while. But when they came back, we trusted them more than we trusted the white man. And that was our first downfall, the first downfall of the newly independent Africa. Because the ones who were cautious, the ones who saw through the lies, the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, the likes of Patrice Lumumba, the likes of Ben Bella, the likes of David Dacko of Central African Republic, they were seen as people who did not know what they were saying back then. In real sense, they're the ones who could see through the lies. They could look at Julius Nyerere, for example, and see through him. They could look at Jomo Kenyatta and see through him. They could look at Azikiwe of Nigeria and see through him. They could see that you people, where have you been for the past 10 years? We've not been seeing you. Who financed your education wherever you are? How did you even manage to land in the UK for the last 10 years? Who accommodated you? Who paid for your education? Where have you emerged from all of a sudden as we are getting independence? There were people who actually saw through the lies, but they were treated as people who did not know what they were saying.
The United States of America, a debate now rages. The Taliaferro-Washington approach, where you conform without transforming, and the W.E.B. Du Bois approach, where you transform education. And remember, W.E.B. Du Bois is the person who then, I think he earned first PhD, African-American to earn a PhD at the University of Harvard. I think he's buried here in Ghana, W.E.B. Du Bois. And another man emerges from the United States, Carter G. Woodson, in 1933. He's involved in the system, and he writes a book, The Miseducation of the Negro. He has now looked at the education system and he's asking, what history are you teaching to young Africans? What geography are you teaching to young Africans? What chemistry are you teaching to young Africans? He's interrogating education at all levels because he knows that education is the key via which you can gain genuine transformation. Carter G. Woodson writes that book. But in 1933, outside of the United States of America, outside of the Caribbean, into the continent of Africa, we are already beginning to see agitation to regain independence, to become masters of our own affairs. It starts very early through various movements which are led by unschooled people, unschooled from the Western perspective. Agitation about land rights, because these are going to become important later, even at the university. The Mau Mau movement in Kenya, the Hehe rebellion in Uganda in the 1990s, Omuka Makabarega of the Bunyoro Kitara Empire. Here in West Africa, we see the resistance in Benin, and we see the resistance among the Yoruba people, the Temne and the Mende in Sierra Leone. So there is activity across the continent culminating in the formation of political organization, paradoxically and ironically by the people who are trained in Europe and whom they thought would be their agents, giving meaning to what is written by Kenya's Ngugi wa Thiong'o in his book, The River Between, when he instructs his chief character, Wayaki, go unto the white man and learn what he teaches you, but come back and do the right thing. You can see that the impact is also in the literature of it. So when you look at the books that are being written at that time in the 1950s, whether it is Chinua who is writing, whether it's Sembene Otsman whether it's Peter Abrahams who is writing, whether it's Alan Patton who is writing, you can see there is something about the writing at that time which is informing how you are going to organize yourselves. And when Nkrumah comes back to Ghana, invited by the UGCC, he finds a few conservatives, because there'll always be such, who think that the slave master's house is fine. Just make it a little better. And as one wise man said, one of the greatest the most dangerous things is to have a happy slave. And as Malcolm X puts in his analogy of the house Negro and the field Negro, he says, the house Negro, when the master's house is burning, he says, our house is burning. But the field says, let it burn down. So you can see, even within the educated class, the quality of education has affected people differently. And those of you who are Ghanaians now know when Kwame writes his book, Dark Days in Ghana, when he is exiled in Conakry, and he talks about why the CPP was, where he created his own political party, you can begin to see the urgency of the moment. And it's not only happening there, it is happening in different parts of the world. To me, in Africa, in the former French colonies, you can see the appetite now through the Pan-African spirit to do something to change. We fight and regain independence, and it's never lost on me that is those who are Western educated of whatever kind who are in the forefront of the struggle for independence. In South Africa, as I've already stated, it starts with Kaisa Kaseme, it starts with Lutuli, the other ones take it over, Nelson Mandela, and people like Mbeki a little later take it over. You go to SWAPO in Namibia, the ones who take it are Sam Nujoma, Andimba, Haman Toivo. You go to Mozambique, it is Mondlane and Samora. You go to Malawi, it is Kamuzu. You go to Zambia, it is Kaunda and Kapwepwe. You go to Angola, it is Neto, Savimbi, and Roberto. You come to Kenya, it is Jomo, Oginga, and Thomas Joseph Mboya, and Gikonyo.
And I've lost audio of the video. I don't know if you can hear it from your side, but on my side I can't get the audio of Lumumba's video for the last 1 minute. But basically, as we come to the end, it's a long video that we are going to finish maybe on our next show, because Lumumba is very informed and talks about the education system and the systems in Africa, and why. On our next show, we are going to look at why Africa was designed to fail from the word go, from as they were even giving us independence, if they really gave it to us. It was designed to fail from the very first moment. Before they gave it to us, they sat down and created systems already that were to make sure and ensure that whatever happens, Africa was going to fail, and it failed. And you can see the time that it started getting planned. For example, look at the timing of the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. It's leading to Africa's independence in the late 1950s and the early 1960s. Look at the airlifting. Look at most of those events before they even left. they had already seen that it was not going to be, they were not going to be welcomed in Africa for far too long. In as much as our forefathers were, our grandfathers, not forefathers, our grandfathers in the 50s and the 40s were uneducated in Western standards. They never went to school or learned in the Western standards. They knew that those people could not be lied to as much as they could. They are lying to us right now. They knew that those people, in as much as they were illiterate in the Western standards, they could see through their lies. So they tried selling them the lie of your riches are in heaven, give us your lands, you are going to get your riches in heaven. And the Mau Mau told them, no, we want our lands right now. If there is another one in heaven, we are going to get that one in heaven later. But for now, we just want our land. And so they started preparing earlier for the exit. And they did that by crafting a system, tailoring a system from the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 to the Monrovia Conference in 1961 to the Addis Ababa Conference in 1963 to the Casablanca Conference in 1960s, the early 60s. They did that earlier enough, preparing for an exit earlier enough. And so that is why in our next show, we are going to look at why Africa was designed to fail from the word go. It was designed to fail. As they were leaving, they made sure it was going to fail. So as we come to the end of the show, this has been the Diary of a Young Black King. And today you are looking at decolonizing our systems and how we are a continent that still runs on foreign systems. The foreign systems are too many for us to look at in one show. And today we are just looking at the education system. How the education system was crafted, tailored, designed to make Africans slaves of the system. Teaching us skills and non-entities rather than opening up our mind, being taught to think, being taught to read, being taught to write, but not how to reason. We're taught how to read and write, but not how to reason. So on our next show, we are going to look at that. So big shout out to everybody who was with me, from Jiba Jaba, to Byron Scott, to General Mosquito, to Robert Williams. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your weekend. It's 2:32 West African time, so it's an afternoon here in Kenya. I'm about to go start my weekend. Hope you enjoyed the rest of your day, Jiba Jaba, Robert Williams, and the rest of the family. It's always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. See you on Monday. Have a good weekend.